Welcome to The Explainer. We're going to tackle one of the biggest, maybe the biggest, mystery in all of science. And that mystery is you. Why is it that science can map out the entire cosmos, but it hits a total brick wall when it tries to explain your own private inner world? It really all comes down to this one question, doesn't it? Why does it feel like something to be you? We're not talking about what your brain does. We're asking why all that buzzing, all that chemistry is accompanied by an actual subjective experience. The movie that's constantly playing inside your head. All right, let's just dive right into this thing. Here's our game plan for this little investigation. First, we're going to define the mystery itself. Then we'll separate what we can explain from what we can't. After that, we'll look at the key evidence, hear from some philosophical witnesses, line up the usual suspects when it comes to theories, and finally, see why this case is still wide open. So we really do start with a kind of crisis. Modern science has been just unbelievably successful at explaining the physical world, right? But it completely stumbles when it runs up against the simple, undeniable fact that you have a private first-person reality. And here's the real conflict. Science is built on objective, third-person data, stuff that anyone can go and verify for themselves. But your consciousness, that's first-person data. It's totally subjective. And that direct experience, well, that's a real part of the world that science has a really hard time measuring from the outside. Okay, so to get a grip on this, we've got to separate what science is actually pretty good at from where it gets completely stuck. The philosopher David Chalmers, he famously drew a line in the sand, splitting the whole challenge into two buckets, the so-called easy problems and the one single hard problem. And what's so interesting here is how this just frames the entire debate. The easy problems, and let's be clear, they're still incredibly complex, are all about function. How does the brain work? But the hard problem, that's about feeling. Why does it feel like anything to have a brain that works in the first place? Yeah, this table just lays it out perfectly. The easy problems ask stuff like, how does the brain see the color red? That's a question about mechanics, about wiring. The hard problem asks, why does seeing red feel like red? That's a question about the experience itself. One of them can be tackled with our current neuroscience. The other one, it seems to need something more. Right, so at the absolute heart of this whole mystery, the smoking gun in our investigation, if you will, is this concept called qualia. So what are qualia? They're the individual raw feelings of an experience. The specific shade of blue you're looking at right now, the warmth of the coffee you're drinking, the actual sound of my voice in your ears, each one of those is a qualia. They're the basic building blocks of your entire inner world. And it's these four properties that make qualia so slippery for a purely physical science to get a hold of. They're private. Only you can experience yours. They're ineffable. Try perfectly describing the taste of a strawberry to someone who's never had one. You can't. And that makes them really, really resistant to objective third-person analysis. All right, now for the fun part. Let's hear from some key witnesses. We're going to look at a few famous thought experiments from philosophy that really testify against a purely physical explanation for the mind. Over 300 years ago, the philosopher Leibniz imagined shrinking down and walking inside a brain like it was a giant mill. And he pointed out you'd see all the parts whirring and pushing against each other, but you would never, ever see the thought itself. This idea is what we now call the explanatory gap, that huge chasm between the physical machinery and the mental experience. Now let's talk about maybe the most famous one, the philosophical zombie. Okay, imagine a perfect physical copy of you. It walks like you, talks like you, acts exactly like you in every way. But on the inside, there's nothing. No feeling, no awareness. It's all dark. The lights are on, but absolutely nobody's home. And the logic here is actually pretty powerful. The argument goes, if you can even imagine a perfect physical duplicate of a person without consciousness, that suggests that consciousness isn't automatically guaranteed by the physical stuff alone. It must be something extra, something beyond the purely physical. And finally, we've got Mary, the color scientist. So Mary has spent her entire life in a black and white room, but she's a genius and she has learned every single physical fact there is to know about color. So the day comes, she's released from the room, and she sees a bright red tomato for the very first time. The question is, does she learn something new? Because if the answer is yes, then her complete physical knowledge wasn't actually complete knowledge after all, was it? So, with all this evidence on the table, let's go ahead and look at the lineup of the main theories, the suspects that are trying to solve this thing. You can pretty much see a clear divide here. On one side, you've got the materialists, who try to explain consciousness as being purely physical, but they keep running into that explanatory gap. On the other side, you've got dualists, who accept that consciousness is non-physical, but then they have to figure out how it could possibly interact with the physical brain. And then you've got this other group, the eliminativists, who take this really radical step and just say, you know what? This whole idea of qualia is a mistake, and future neuroscience will just get rid of it.
So, okay, we've reviewed the evidence, we've looked at the suspects. Where does our investigation stand today? Why is this case still unsolved?
Well, if you look at this, you can see that neuroscience is making incredible progress on one front. We're mapping the neural correlates of consciousness, basically the brain activity that goes along with an experience. We're getting really, really good at answering the easy problems. But, and this is the absolute crucial point, correlation is not explanation. Knowing where an experience happens in the brain doesn't tell us why that specific neural firing should feel like anything at all. It's like we've found the scene of the crime, we've cordoned it off, but we still have absolutely no idea how the crime was committed. And this stalemate, this impasse, has led to some pretty wild and radical ideas. Some people argue the hard problem is just an illusion. Others say it's a deep mystery our brains just aren't built to solve. And then you have theories like panpsychism, which propose that consciousness isn't even produced by the brain, but that it's a fundamental feature of the universe itself, like mass or spin. And that really brings us to our final, kind of provocative thought. Is it possible that explaining consciousness is just beyond what our current science can do? Will solving the mystery of you require a full-blown scientific revolution, one that introduces entirely new, fundamental laws of nature, just to account for the simple, undeniable fact that it feels like something to be you?